In the township of Soweto, where the dust rises like prayers at dawn and the voices of vendors weave songs older than time, there lived a man named Thabo Makais. He was known throughout the settlement as a man of steady hands and careful words, one who carried his family's honor like a cloak woven by his ancestors. For 3 full moons, Thabo had been away in Durban, working at the docks where ships came bearing goods from lands beyond the horizon. The money was good, better than what the struggling mines could offer, and so he had gone with his wife Nomsa's blessing, her hands pressed against his chest in farewell. Now, as the taxi rumbled along the N1 highway toward Johannesburg, Thabo's heart drummed with anticipation. The other passengers dozed or stared blankly at the passing veld, but Thabo could not rest. In his bag lay gifts: a length of printed cloth in blues and golds for Nomsa, sweet coaxisters still warm in their paper wrapping, and a small wooden carving of a bird he had commissioned from a Zulu craftsman. He imagined her face when she saw him standing in their doorway unannounced, how her eyes would widen like a child's before Christmas. "Brother," said the old man sitting beside him, his face carved with the wisdom of 70 winters, "you smile like a man carrying secrets. But remember what the elders say, uqs ubone kale, kufanili ukulum. To see clearly, you must speak clearly." Thabo laughed, waving away the words. "Baba, I am only bringing joy to my home. Is it not good for a man to surprise his wife with his return?" The old man sucked his teeth thoughtfully, his gaze distant. Surprises are like stones thrown into still water. Sometimes they make beautiful ripples. Sometimes they disturb what was sleeping below. He said nothing more, but pulled his hat lower over his eyes and seemed to sleep. Thabo dismissed the strange warning. What could be wrong? He had called Nomsa every week, though the conversations were brief due to the expense of airtime. She had assured him all was well. The children were with her mother in the Eastern Cape for the school holidays, the house was standing, the neighbors were kind. He had no reason to doubt her. They had been married for 12 years, since they were both young and full of dreams that had not yet learned the weight of the world. The taxi stopped at a petrol station near Midrand. Thabo stepped out to stretch his legs, buying a Coca-Cola from a vendor whose radio played gospel music into the afternoon heat. The sun was beginning its descent, painting the sky in shades of amber and rust. By the time they reached Soweto, twilight would be settling over the township like a blanket woven from smoke and starlight. As he stood there, a woman approached him, ancient beyond years, her back bent like a question mark, her eyes sharp as a hawk's. She wore the traditional blankets of a sangoma, and around her neck hung bones and beads that clicked together with each movement. "Numzane," she said, her voice like wine through dry grass, "you walk toward a door, but do you know what waits behind it?" Thabo felt a chill despite the heat. Go, I am going home to my wife." "Home," she repeated, tasting the word. "Yes. But whose home?" "The ancestors are restless tonight. They whisper of tears and choices. Ikaniso lia baba, kadwa lia philisa. The truth is bitter, but it heals." She pressed something into his palm, a small cloth bag that smelled of herbs and earth. "When the heart breaks, this will remind you that you are still breathing." Before he could respond, she had melted back into the crowd of travelers and hawkers. Thabo opened his palm and stared at the bag, his earlier excitement now tinged with unease. The old man's words, the Sangoma's warning, were these signs from his ancestors, or merely coincidence? "Taxi to Soweto is leaving," the driver shouted. Thabo climbed back in, gripping the bag tightly. Perhaps he should have called Nomsa, told her he was coming. But no, he had wanted this moment, this joy of reunion. Surely the warnings were nothing. Surely his wife waited for him as faithfully as he had worked for her. The taxi pulled onto the highway, carrying Thabo toward his destination. Behind them, the sun bled into the horizon, and the first stars appeared like ancestors watching from the eternal darkness, silent and knowing. The taxi dropped Thabo at the corner of Vilakazi and Moima Street, where the famous murals of Mandela and Tutu watched over the intersection with painted eyes full of wisdom. The township was alive with its evening rhythm, children kicking a makeshift football between houses, women gathering water from the communal tap, the smoke of cooking fires rising like offerings to the heavens. Tabo breathed it in deeply, this smell of home. Wood smoke, grilled meat, red dust, and the particular sweetness of sunset in Soweto. He walked slowly through the familiar streets, greeting those he knew. Mrs. Dlamini, hanging washing on her line, called out, "Tabo, you're back. Does Namsa know?" "It's a surprise, Mama," he responded, grinning. But Mrs. Dlamini's smile faltered for a heartbeat, and she turned quickly back to her washing. Tabo noticed but thought nothing of it. Perhaps she was simply tired from the day's labor. At the spaza shop on the corner, he stopped to buy cold drinks. Namsa loved Fanta orange, he remembered. The shopkeeper, a Somali man named Ahmed who had lived in the township for 10 years, took his money without his usual banter. "Brother Ahmed, why so quiet? Business is bad." Ahmed's eyes shifted. "Business is business, my friend. Welcome home." But his tone carried something else, something Tabo could not name. The unease from earlier began to creep back, settling in his stomach like spoiled milk. He walked faster now, past the apostolic church where Sister Martha and her white-robed congregation were beginning their evening prayers, their voices rising in harmonies that seemed to reach directly to God's ear. He thought of stopping, of saying a prayer of thanksgiving for his safe return, but his feet carried him onward. His house was just 3 streets away now. It was a modest home, 4 rooms with walls of brick and a corrugated iron roof, but it was his. He had built it with his own hands, with help from his brothers and uncles, mixing cement under the hot sun while Namsa brought water and encouragement. The walls held their dreams, their arguments, their laughter, their lovemaking. It was the foundation upon which they had constructed their life together. As he turned onto his street, he saw old Nkulu Sibiko sitting outside his house, carving a walking stick from a piece of yellowwood. The old man had been Tabo's father's friend, a keeper of stories and traditions. "Nkulu," Tabo greeted respectfully, stopping before him. The old man looked up, his roomy eyes focusing slowly. "Tabo, my son, you walk the path home." "Yes, Nkulu. I have been working in Durban. The money is better there." Nkulu Sibiko nodded slowly, his knife continuing its patient work on the wood. "Money is good. But you know what the ancestors say, Inlu Yakua Ngamach Amabili, a house is built with 2 stones. Both must be present for the walls to stand straight. I have been sending money home every week, Nkulu. Namsa has not wanted for anything." "Ah," the old man said, his voice carrying a sadness that made Tabo's heart clench. "But money is not presents. A woman needs more than coins, my son. She needs the warmth of her husband beside her when the night is cold and the bed is wide." Tabo shifted his bag from one shoulder to the other. "I'm home now. Everything will be well." Nkulu Sibiko said nothing more, but his knife stilled on the wood, and he watched Tabo with eyes that had seen too much of life's sorrows to believe in easy happiness. Tabo's house was now visible, sitting back from the road behind a small fence he had painted blue 2 years ago. The paint was fading, he noticed. He would repaint it next week. The small garden where Namsa grew spinach and tomatoes looked tended. The curtains in the window were drawn against the settling darkness. He approached quietly, his heart now pounding with something that was no longer pure joy but mixed with apprehension. The warnings of the day echoed in his mind. The old man on the taxi, the Sangoma, Mrs. Dlamini's strange reaction, Ahmed's silence, Nkulu Sibiko's sad wisdom. At the gate he paused. From within the house, he could hear no sound. No radio playing, no movement. Perhaps Namsa was sleeping. She often napped in the early evening, especially when the heat of the day had been oppressive. He pushed open the gate, wincing as it creaked. He had been meaning to oil those hinges for months. He walked up the short path to the door, noting that someone had swept the stoop clean, that Namsa's shoes were lined up neatly beside the door as always, that the small potted aloe plant she loved was flourishing. Everything looked normal. Everything looked like home. So why did his chest feel tight? Why did the Sangoma's bag in his pocket seem to burn against his hip? Why did the evening air suddenly feel too thick to breathe? Tabo stood at his own door, his hand raised to knock, and for the first time since deciding to surprise his wife, he wondered if perhaps he should have called ahead. If perhaps the old wisdom about speaking clearly had merit he had not understood. But it was too late now. He was here. His journey was complete. He reached for the door handle, turned it slowly and pushed. The door opened without resistance. Namsa never locked it during the early evening, trusting in the community's eyes and the protection of their ancestors. Tabo stepped into the small entrance hallway, his bag sliding from his shoulder to the floor with a soft thud that seemed to echo in the stillness. The house smelled of home, the faint scent of this morning's pap, the soap Namsa used to wash floors, the particular smell of their shared life. But there was something else, a foreign cologne, sweet and sharp, that did not belong. Tabo's nostrils flared. "Namsa?" he called, his voice sounding strange in his own ears. Silence answered. But it was not the silence of an empty house. It was the held-breath silence of people who have suddenly frozen, the silence of a rabbit that senses the hawk's shadow. Tabo's heart began to hammer against his ribs like a prisoner demanding release. He moved slowly through the hallway into the small living room. Everything was in its place. The couch they had bought third-hand from a neighbor, the coffee table with its permanent ring stains, the wedding photo on the wall showing them both young and laughing, crowned in joy. Then he heard it. From the bedroom, their bedroom, the sacred space where they had conceived their children, where they had whispered their fears and hopes in the darkness, came a sound. A low murmur. A man's voice, deep and unfamiliar, saying words Tabo could not make out. And then, unmistakably, his wife's laughter. Not the polite laughter of social courtesy, but the intimate laugh of shared secrets, of pleasure, of conspiracy. The world tilted. Tabo stood frozen in his own living room, his mind refusing to accept what his ears had heard. There was a mistake. This was not happening. This was not his wife, his Namsa, who had stood before the ancestors and promised herself to him, who had borne his children, who had wept when he left for Durban and promised to wait faithfully for his return. Another sound, a creaking. The rhythmic creak of their bed, the bed he had built from yellow pine, whose every sound was familiar to him from 1,000 nights of sleep and love. The bag the Sangoma had given him seemed to burn through his pocket. The truth is bitter, but it heals. But Tabo did not want healing. He wanted this to be a nightmare from which he would wake. "Namsa," he called again, louder now, his voice cracking on her name. The sounds from the bedroom stopped abruptly. There was a scuffling, urgent whispers, a curse muttered low. Tabo's feet moved without his conscious command, carrying him toward the bedroom door, which was closed but not locked. The ancestors were watching. He could feel them, the weight of their gaze pressing down on his shoulders. His father, who had taught him that a man's honor was his most precious possession. His grandmother, who had told him stories of women who strayed and the shame that followed. They were all there in the room with him, invisible witnesses to his humiliation. His hand touched the door handle. It was cool beneath his palm, smooth from years of use. How many times had he opened this door? How many times had he walked through it toward rest, toward comfort, toward the woman he loved? "Tabo!" Namsa's voice came from behind the door, high with panic. "Tabo, wait." But waiting was no longer possible. The momentum of this moment, set in motion perhaps from the day he had decided to surprise her, perhaps from some earlier betrayal he had not seen, carried him forward inexorably as a river carries driftwood toward the falls. He opened the door. The scene before him would be carved into his memory with the precision of a master's chisel. Namsa, wrapped hastily in their bedsheet, her hair disheveled, her eyes wide with terror and something else, guilt, yes, but also defiance. And beside her, pulling on trousers with frantic movements, a man Tabo recognized. Jabu, who lived 3 streets over, who had always been too friendly, whose wife had left him last year for reasons the community had whispered about but never spoken clearly. For a long moment, no one moved. The tableau held, suspended in the amber of that terrible instant. Then time rushed forward again, bringing with it sound and fury. "Tabo," Namsa whispered, clutching the sheet tighter. "I can explain." But what explanation could bridge this chasm? What words existed in Zulu, English, or any human tongue that could make this scene anything other than what it was? Jabu had finished with his trousers and was looking for a way past Tabo to the door. "Brother," he began. "Do not call me brother," Tabo said, his voice so cold it seemed to frost the air between them. "A brother does not do this." A brother does not defile another man's home, his bed, his wife. The ancestors' presence grew heavier, their disappointment a weight that bent Tabo's shoulders. He thought of his father's funeral, where he had promised to uphold the family's honor. He thought of his wedding day, when the elders had blessed his union and warned that marriage was sacred work, not to be treated lightly. Jabu pushed past him, his face averted in shame, and ran from the house. Tabo heard the front door slam, heard the gate screech open and bang shut, heard footsteps running down the street, the sound of a coward fleeing consequences. Now it was only Tabo and Namsa, husband and wife, in the bedroom where their marriage had just died. Tabo stood in the doorway, unable to move further into the room, as if an invisible barrier had been erected at the threshold. Namsa remained on the bed, the sheet wrapped around her like a shroud, her chest rising and falling with rapid breaths. The evening light filtering through the curtains cast the room in shades of gray and shadow, as if even the sun was turning its face away from what it had witnessed. How long? Tabo's voice was barely a whisper, but it carried the weight of mountains. Namsa's eyes filled with tears. Tabo, please. How long? The shout erupted from him, a primal sound of anguish that seemed to shake the walls. In the street outside, dogs began to bark, sensing the disturbance in the spiritual order of things. 2 months, Namsa said, her voice breaking. It has been 2 months. 2 months. Tabo's mind calculated quickly. That meant it had started shortly after he left for Durban. While he had been working 12-hour shifts at the docks, his back aching, his hands calloused, sending money home every week for their family's survival, during those same weeks, his wife had been lying with another man in their bed. Why? The question was simple, but it contained multitudes. Why had she betrayed him? Why had she broken her vows? Why had she not spoken if she was unhappy? Why had she let him believe everything was well when he called? Why? Namsa wiped her eyes with the corner of the sheet. You left, she said, and there was anger in her voice now, mixing with the tears. You left me alone, Tabo. You went to Durban for better money, for a better life. But what about me? What about my life? I sent money every week. Tabo protested, his hands spread wide. You and the children wanted for nothing. I wanted my husband. Namsa shot back, rising from the bed, the sheet trailing behind her like a wedding train soiled with mud. I wanted someone to talk to when the night was long, someone to help me when the pipe burst and flooded the kitchen, someone to hold me when I was afraid or lonely or tired. Money is not a husband, Tabo. Money does not warm the bed or chase away nightmares. Tabo felt as if he had been struck. Was she truly trying to justify this? So, because I went to work to provide for my family, you spread your legs for Jabu? That is your answer. The crudeness of his words made Namsa flinch, but she did not back down. I am not justifying what I did. I am telling you why it happened. You decided to leave without really discussing it with me. You said, I am going to Durban, and you went. Did you ask me how I felt? Did you ask what I needed? You said it was fine. Tabo shouted. You blessed me when I left. What else could I say? Namsa's voice rose to match his. Would you have stayed if I had begged? Would you have turned down the money? You had already decided. You were going with my blessing or without it, so I gave it. But blessings do not make loneliness disappear. They stared at each other across the room, two people who had once known each other's hearts now separated by a gulf wider than the distance from Johannesburg to Durban. You should have told me, Tabo said, his voice dropping to something quieter, more broken. If you were struggling, if you were lonely, you should have told me. I would have come home. I would have. Would you? Namsa interrupted. Would you really have left that job, that money, and come home because I was lonely? Or would you have told me to be strong, to wait, that it was only for a little while longer? She shook her head. The truth, Tabo, is that you did not want to know. You wanted me to be fine so you could do what you wanted to do without guilt. The accusation hit him like a physical blow. Was it true? Had he ignored signs of her unhappiness because acknowledging them would have complicated his plans? He thought back to their phone calls, how he had kept them brief to save money, how he had asked, "Is everything okay?" but never really waited for an honest answer, always assuming that yes, everything was fine, because that was what he needed to believe. Even if that is true, he said slowly, even if I failed you as a husband, and maybe I did, that does not excuse what you did. You could have called me. You could have gone to the elders, to your mother, to the pastor. You could have found a way to reach me that did not involve betraying our marriage. Namsa wrapped her arms around herself. I know, she whispered. I know, Tabo. I'm not proud of what I did. When it started, I told myself it was just companionship. Just someone to talk to. Jabba was there and he listened, and slowly it became more. I did not plan it. I did not wake up one morning and decide to destroy our marriage. But you did destroy it, Tabo said, and now the tears were running down his own face, hot and bitter. You destroyed everything we built together. How can I ever trust you again? How can I lie beside you and not wonder who else has been there? How can I look our children in the eyes and pretend their mother has honor? The mention of their children made Namsa sob harder. The children. Oh God, the children. What will we tell them? We will tell them the truth, Tabo said harshly. That their mother is an adulteress. That is the word, is it not? Finga. The ancestors do not lie about these things. Please, Tabo, Namsa begged, moving toward him. Please, can we not find a way through this? I made a terrible mistake. I will end it with Jabu. It is already ended. I will do whatever you need. We can go to the pastor, to a counselor. We can. No, Tabo cut her off, stepping back as if her proximity might contaminate him. I cannot even look at you right now. I need. He turned away, his mind spinning. I need to think. I need to breathe. I need to not be in this house that smells of betrayal. He walked out of the bedroom, through the living room with its mocking wedding photo, and out the front door into the gathering night. Behind him, he heard Namsa calling his name, but he did not stop. Could not stop. The township was darker now, the streetlights flickering on, casting pools of yellow light on the dusty streets. Tabo walked without direction, his feet carrying him through familiar paths while his mind reeled with pain and rage and grief. Tabo's feet led him without conscious thought to the place where men in the township went when their troubles were too heavy to carry alone. The yard of Mklusibiko, where the old man sat with others of his generation around a small fire, their faces carved by flickering light into masks of ancient wisdom. They looked up as Tabo approached, and in their eyes he saw that they already knew. News traveled fast in Soweto, faster than any phone call or text message. The spiritual network of the community, Mrs. Dlamini who had seen his arrival, Ahmed at the spaza shop, the women at the water tap, Jabu's desperate flight through the streets, had already woven the story together. Sit, my son, Mklusibiko said, gesturing to a spot by the fire. Tabo collapsed onto the ground, his legs suddenly unable to hold him. The other men, Baba Ndlovu, who had been a teacher, Huzuma, who had worked in the mines before the accidents took his hearing, and young Uncle Saifo, barely 40 but already weathered by life, said nothing. They simply sat, their presence a quiet solidarity. For a long time, no one spoke. The fire crackled and popped, sending sparks into the darkness where they died like tiny stars. From nearby houses came the sounds of evening. A baby crying, a mother singing, the clatter of pots being washed. Normal life, continuing as if Tabo's world had not just shattered. Finally, Mklusibiko spoke. The ancestors warned you, but you did not listen. This is the way of the young. They believe wisdom is for the old, that their situation is different, special, exempt from the patterns that have repeated since the first man and woman walked the earth. I did not know, Tabo said hoarsely. How could I have known she would do this? You knew your wife was alone, Baba Ndlovu said, his voice gentle but firm. You knew the nights were long and the community is full of hungry eyes. You knew, but you believed love was enough of a shield. Love is powerful, yes, but it is not a fence that needs no tending. So it is my fault? Tabo's voice rose with anger. I should have known she would be faithless, so I should have stayed poor, never tried to better our situation? No one says it is your fault, Muzuma said, his voice loud in the way of the deaf. But neither is it only her fault. Marriage is like a garden. Both people must tend it, or the weeds grow. You were watering the garden with money from far away, but weeds do not care about money. They need presence, attention, the work of hands in the soil. The ancestors teach us, Uncle Sifo added, Ubuntu, I am because we are. But you forgot this, brother. You thought, I will work, I will send money, I will be the provider. But a marriage is not a business. It is a living thing like fire. He gestured to the flames before them. If you leave fire untended, it either dies or spreads where it should not. Tabo put his head in his hands. What do I do now? How do I move forward? I cannot forgive her. Every time I close my eyes, I see them together in our bed. The men were silent for a moment, each drawing on their own experiences of pain and betrayal, of loss and recovery. You have choices, Nkulu Sibiko said finally. The first choice is to divorce her. Send her back to her family in disgrace, take the children, start again. This is the old way, the way of our fathers. An unfaithful wife brings shame, and shame must be cut away like disease. But, Baba Ndlovu continued, there is another way. The harder way. You can choose to understand that you are both at fault, she for her betrayal, you for your absence. You can choose to rebuild, to go to the elders, to undergo the rituals of cleansing and forgiveness. This way is painful and slow, like healing from a deep wound, but it can be done if both hearts are willing. I am not willing, Tabo said flatly. How can I be willing? She destroyed us. Did she? Nkuluzuma asked. Or did he start dying the day you left without truly consulting her heart? Think, my son. Did she beg you not to go? Did she cry? Did she seem happy when you left? Tabo thought back. Namsa had been quiet in the days before his departure, quieter than usual. He had attributed it to the natural sadness of parting. But had she tried to tell him something? Had he simply not listened because he did not want to hear? I thought I was doing the right thing, he whispered. Working hard, making money, building a better life. Is that wrong? Nothing is simply right or wrong, Uncle Sifo said. Life is more complicated than that. You were right to want to provide. But you were wrong to decide alone, to not include your wife in the choosing. And she was wrong to betray you instead of speaking her truth. You both made mistakes, brother. Now you must decide if the love you once had is worth the work of resurrection. Tabo stared into the fire, watching the flames dance and transform, consuming wood and turning it to ash and heat and light. Was his marriage ash, or could it still give light? The ancestors, Mo Sibiko said, his voice dropping to a storyteller's cadence, teach us that every human being will face the moment when the path divides. One path leads to righteousness that is also rigid. You cast out your wife, you are the wronged husband, everyone sympathizes, but you are alone, bitter, and your children grow up in a broken home. The other path leads through the valley of humiliation. You forgive, you rebuild, you face the mockery of those who say you are weak, but perhaps, on the other side, you find something stronger than what you had before. Which path did you take, Mgalu? Tabo asked. When your wife. He trailed off, unsure if he should mention the old scandal that everyone knew but no one spoke of. When my wife lay with another man 40 years ago? Nkulu Sibiko finished the question. I took the second path. It was the hardest thing I ever did, harder than anything the apartheid government threw at me, harder than poverty or sickness or loss. But I do not regret it. We had 30 more years together before she died, and in those years, we learned what marriage truly means, not the easy romance of youth, but the hard commitment of two broken people choosing each other again and again. Tabo felt something crack open in his chest, not his heart breaking further, but something else, a possibility he had not considered. Forgiveness. But even as the word entered his mind, the image of Namsa and Jabu returned, and rage flooded back. How could he forgive? How could he ever forget? You do not have to decide tonight, Baba Ndlovu said, as if reading his thoughts. Go home. Sleep if you can, though I know you will not. In the morning, speak to the elders. They will guide you through the rituals whichever path you choose. Tabo nodded and stood, his body aching as if he had been beaten. The men rose with him, each embracing him in turn, their arms offering the strength he did not have. Remember, Nkulu Sibiko said as Tabo turned to leave, The ancestors are always watching. They see your pain, but they also see your wife's pain, and they weigh all things in balance. Do not act from rage alone. Act from wisdom, even if wisdom hurts. Tabo walked away from the fire, back into the dark streets, carrying the weight of his decision like a mountain on his shoulders. Tabo did not return home that night. Instead, he walked the streets of Soweto until exhaustion finally drove him to Uncle Saifo's house, where he was given a blanket and a corner of the floor without questions. Sleep came in fragments, torn apart by dreams of Namsa's face, Jabu's fleeing figure, and his own hands reaching for something that kept dissolving into smoke. When dawn broke over the township, painting the corrugated roofs in shades of gold and rust, Tabo sat on Uncle Saifo's stoop and watched the community come to life. Women emerged to sweep their stoops, men headed to the taxi rank for work, children chased chickens between houses. Life continued as it always did, indifferent to individual suffering. Uncle Saifo brought him tea and bread. The elders have been called. They will meet at noon in the community hall. Both you and Namsa must come. Tabo's stomach churned at the thought of seeing her again, but he nodded. This was the way of things. Personal matters, when they reached this level of crisis, became community matters. The elders would hear both sides, consult the ancestors, and provide guidance according to tradition and wisdom. At 11:30, Tabo walked to the community hall, a building of concrete blocks with a tin roof that had served as everything from a wedding venue to a voting station. Inside, the space was cool and dim, lit by windows set high in the walls. The elders sat in a semicircle, 5 of them, representing different lineages and areas of wisdom. Lulu Sibiko was there, as was Mama Kumalo, known for her gift of seeing through lies, and Baba Nkosi, a retired teacher whose understanding of human nature was legendary. Namsa was already there, sitting on a bench with her mother beside her. She had wrapped herself in traditional dress, her head covered in respect, her face swollen from crying. When Tabo entered, she looked up, her eyes meeting his with a mixture of hope and despair. They sat on opposite sides of the room. Between them stretched a distance far greater than the physical space, a chasm of hurt and betrayal that seemed impossible to bridge. Mama Kumalo spoke first. We are gathered because the sacred bond of marriage has been wounded. Before the ancestors and this community, we must examine what has happened and determine the path forward. She turned to Namsa. Daughter, speak your truth. Namsa's voice was barely audible. She told them everything, Tabo's departure, the loneliness that had consumed her, Jaba's attention at first innocent then crossing boundaries, her own weakness and failure to resist. She spoke of how she had justified it to herself, how she had told herself it meant nothing, how she had planned to end it before Tabo returned but had been caught in a web of her own making. I have brought shame on my family, on my husband, on myself, she concluded, tears streaming down her face. I do not ask for forgiveness because I know I do not deserve it. I ask only that when the truth is told to our children, they know that I loved them, and that my failure was mine alone. Then it was Tabo's turn. He spoke of his journey to Durban, his belief that providing financially was his primary duty, his assumption that Namsa would be fine because he was working hard for their future. He spoke of his pain at discovering the betrayal, his rage, his sense of having been destroyed. But as he talked, something shifted. He heard his own words, I assumed, I believed, I thought, and recognized that he had made decisions without truly listening to his wife's needs. But that does not excuse what she did, he added quickly. I may have failed as a husband in some ways, but I never broke my vows. I never dishonored our bed. The sin is hers, not mine. The elders sat in silence for a long moment, their eyes closed as if consulting with forces unseen. The air in the hall grew heavy, thick with the weight of judgment and ancestral presence. Tabo felt the small cloth bag from the Sangoma pressing against his chest. He had moved it to his shirt pocket that morning. Finally, Baba Nkosi spoke, his voice measured and deep. There is an old story, one that my grandmother told me when I was a boy learning about marriage. It is the story of the broken pot. The room grew quieter still, everyone leaning forward to hear the elder's wisdom. A woman had a beautiful clay pot, given to her by her grandmother, passed down through generations. It held water perfectly, its surface smooth and its shape pleasing to the eye. One day, she asked her husband to fetch water while she prepared food. The husband, tired from working in the fields and resentful that she had not fetched the water herself as was her usual task, carried the pot carelessly. It slipped from his hands and cracked. The woman was furious. "You have broken what was most precious to me," she cried. "You were careless and now it is destroyed." The husband, defensive and proud, replied, "You should not have asked me to do your work. If you had fetched the water yourself, the pot would be whole." They argued bitterly, each blaming the other. The husband said his only fault was agreeing to help when he was tired. The wife said his only duty was to be careful with what was precious. Both believed they were right. Both believed the other bore the greater blame. They took their dispute to the village elder, who listened to both sides. Then the elder asked to see the broken pot. She examined it carefully, running her fingers over the crack. Finally she spoke. "Tell me, husband, when you took the pot, did you ask your wife if there was a proper way to carry it? Did you inquire whether it was fragile, whether it needed special care?" The husband admitted he had not. He had simply taken it, assuming he knew how to carry a pot. "And tell me, wife, when you asked your husband to fetch water, did you tell him how precious this pot was to you? Did you explain its history, its importance, or warn him to be especially careful?" The wife admitted she had not. She had assumed he would know, that he would care for it as she did. The elder set the pot down between them. "You both see a crack and argue about whose hand caused it. But I see two hands that failed to meet, his hand that did not ask and her hand that did not teach. Yes, he dropped the pot. This is true. But she sent it into careless hands without guidance. The pot is broken because both of you failed it in different ways." Baba Nkosi paused, letting the story settle over the room like dust after a storm. Now, the pot could not be unbroken. The crack was real, permanent. But the elder showed them how to repair it using a method called kintsugi, mixing clay with gold dust. The repaired pot was no longer perfect. The golden seams showed clearly where it had broken. But some said it was more beautiful for having been broken and mended, for the gold caught the light in ways the smooth surface never had. He turned his gaze first to Namsa, then to Tabo. "Your marriage is the broken pot. Namsa, you dropped it. There is no denying this truth. Your betrayal is the crack that runs deep. But Tabo, you handed her a precious thing without care, without attention, without asking what she needed to carry it safely. You did not break it with your own hands, but you created the conditions where breaking became possible." Mama Kumalo leaned forward, her voice like wind through reeds. "The question now is not about blame. Blame has been established, both of you carry it. The question is whether this pot can be mended, and whether you both have the courage to do the difficult work of repair." Tabo felt something in his chest loosening, though whether it was toward forgiveness or final breaking, he could not tell. He looked at Namsa across the room and saw not just the woman who had betrayed him, but the girl he had courted, the bride who had stood beside him, the mother who had borne his children through pain and joy. "I do not know if I can forgive," he said honestly. "Every time I close my eyes, I see what I saw. The image is burned into my mind like a brand." "Then you carry your own burden," Nkulu Sibiko said gently. "Unforgiveness is like drinking poison and hoping the other person dies. It destroys the vessel that contains it." "But how?" Tabo's voice broke. "How do I forgive something so terrible? The ancestors teach that adultery is—" "The ancestors teach many things," Mama Kumalo interrupted. "They teach that adultery wounds the sacred bond. But they also teach Ubuntu, that we are human together, that we all carry flaws and failures, that mercy is as important as justice. They teach that every person will stand before the great judgment one day and will wish for mercy more than righteous punishment." She stood and walked to the center of the room, her presence commanding. "I will tell you what the ancestors whisper to me now. They say that this moment, this terrible, painful moment, is a gift. Not the betrayal itself, which is evil, but the revelation of it. For if Tabo had never come home early, if he had never learned the truth, the marriage would have continued on a foundation of lies. The rot would have spread unseen until the whole structure collapsed. She turned to Namsa. You would have carried your guilt like a stone in your heart, growing harder and more distant, never fully present in your own life. The secret would have poisoned everything. Then to Tabo. And you would have continued believing that money and absence were acceptable substitutes for presence and partnership. You would have missed years of truly knowing your wife, of growing together, of building something real rather than something convenient. So the ancestors are glad my wife betrayed me? Tabo asked bitterly. This is their wisdom? No, Mama Kumalo said firmly. The ancestors grieve the sin, but they do not waste pain. They use it to teach, to refine, to transform. Gold becomes precious only through fire. A person becomes wise only through suffering. The question is whether you will let this fire consume you or refine you. Baba Nkosi stood as well. We, the elders, will give you our guidance. First, Namsa must undergo the cleansing ritual. She must go to the river, she must confess before the ancestors at the family shrine, she must seek forgiveness from the spiritual realm. This is not optional. The pollution of adultery affects not just the marriage but the entire family line. It must be addressed spiritually. Namsa nodded, bowing her head. Second, if you choose to repair this marriage, both of you must undergo counseling, not just from the pastor, but from a trained counselor who can help you understand the patterns that led here. You must learn to speak to each other, truly speak, not just exchange words. Third, Mama Kumalo added, Tabo must make a choice within 7 days. Either you forgive and commit to rebuilding, or you divorce and part ways. But you cannot hold this over her forever, using it as a weapon whenever you are angry. That is not justice, that is torture. The ancestors do not permit one person to hold another in eternal punishment. Choose mercy or choose separation, but choose clearly. The elders sat back down, and the room fell silent once more. Tabo felt the weight of the decision pressing down on him like the sky itself. 7 days to choose his future. 7 days to decide whether 12 years of marriage, 2 children, shared dreams and memories could be rebuilt from the ashes of betrayal. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the cloth bag the Sangoma had given him. A woman gave me this, he said. She said when my heart breaks, it would remind me I am still breathing. He opened the bag and poured its contents into his palm. Inside were seeds, small, dark, unremarkable seeds, and a piece of paper with words written in careful script. What dies can be planted. What is buried can rise again. The choice between death and resurrection is always yours. Tabo stared at the seeds, understanding flooding through him. These were not just any seeds, they were the seeds of the resurrection plant, the plant that appears dead and brown but returns to life when watered. The Sangoma had known, somehow, what he would face and what choice would stand before him. I need the 7 days, he said finally. I cannot decide now. My heart is too raw, my mind too confused. I need time to hear what the ancestors truly want from me, time to search my own soul. That is wisdom, Nkulu Sibiko said, nodding. Go both of you. Live separately for these 7 days. Pray, reflect, listen to the deep voice within. On the 7th day, return here and tell us your decision. As they left the community hall, Tabo and Namsa walked in opposite directions, each carrying the weight of the broken pot between them. The community watched them go, some with judgment, some with compassion, all with the understanding that they were witnessing a story as old as humanity itself, the story of love, betrayal, and the agonizing choice between justice and mercy. The sun stood high above Soweto, casting short shadows. In 7 days, it would return to this same position, and Tabo would have to speak the words that would determine not just his fate, but the fate of his children, his wife, and the legacy he would leave for the generations that would come after him. The ancestors watched and waited, their ancient eyes patient with the slowness of human wisdom, their hearts full of the understanding that comes only from having walked the earth themselves, having made their own terrible choices and lived with the consequences.